By 1988, special effects artist Stan Winston had already made his mark in Hollywood. He made his first big splash bringing the T-800 endoskeleton to life in the 1984 Terminator movie for James Cameron. Then 2 years later, he would again go to work with Cameron on a little movie called Aliens, in which Winston would win the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Eventually, he decided that it was time to direct a movie himself. And it was no surprise that his first effort would be in the horror genre, bringing a demonic creature to life in the movie Pumpkinhead. We'll take a look back at this supernatural horror classic on the next Back to the Feature.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
In the 1980s, a lot of horror movies were made. Back then, horror proved to be quite popular at the theater, and most of them made a decent return on their low budgets. Unfortunately, there were a lot of those movies that didn't do very well. I feel like Pumpkinhead kind of falls somewhere in the middle. The story is pretty much a regular revenge story, but the demon creature called Pumpkinhead looked cool as hell. I remember seeing this at my local theater back in 1989. It had came out almost 2 weeks before Valentine's Day, so I took my new girlfriend to go see it. I figured a movie about a demon named Pumpkinhead, hell-bent on revenge, just seemed like a good idea for date night. I will say that I miss the days when movies were only $5 though. Much of the heavy lifting on screen is done by Lance Henriksen, who had already made a name for himself on movies like The Right Stuff, Terminator, Aliens, and Near Dark. You always knew he'd bring his A-game to the screen. Besides playing the lead, he's the biggest name in the cast. And if you watch closely, you'll see future Blossom and Big Bang Theory star Mayim Bialik in her first acting job. Surprisingly, we get our first look at the title creature within the first 10 minutes of the movie. It's late one night and Tom Harley, his wife and young son are holed up in their cabin. They all look scared and Tom is cradling the shotgun when there's a knock at the door by a frightened man who says something is after him, but that he's innocent. Tom doesn't want any part of it and tells him to leave or get shot. The man leaves but is quickly caught by Pumpkinhead. You have to be really paying attention because he's only on screen for a couple of brief moments. One of those moments is Tom's son Ed looking out the window as Pumpkinhead lifts the man off the ground and kills him. In the present, Lance Henriksen plays the young Ed Harley, now a widowed father who owns a small store out in the country where it's just him and his young son Billy. They live a simple life and have a strong father-son bond that is represented by the necklace that Billy made his dad to wear. Ed and Billy go to work at Ed's small roadside grocery store. The day starts off normally until a group of campers shows up, and it turns out they're planning a little trip to do some dirt bike riding up in the hills. Billy's dog instantly doesn't like them and starts barking at Joel, the one guy you can tell is a self-absorbed asshole. Dogs always know. Joel decides he's too good to stick around and play nice with the locals, so he pulls his bike off the trailer and takes off into the hills. As he takes off, Mr. Wallace shows up in his truck with his grandkids who are all looking pretty dirty. Does one of these kids look familiar to you? Does Mr. Wallace look familiar to you? We just covered an alien invasion movie he was in during one of our recent episodes. One of the youngest takes the baseball that Billy plays fetch with and his older brother makes him give it back. And then his siblings torment him by saying he did something bad and that means he's going to be punished by Pumpkinhead. The chanting not only has the young boy freaked out, it's also starting to freak out the campers. Ed tells Billy to stay in the store while he runs up to the house real quick because he forgot the feed order for Mr. Wallace. He's going to pick up the feed and then come back and pick up Billy. Joel's brother Steve decides to join Joel on his escapades while Mr. Wallace and Ed both head out. The two brothers go racing off into the hills doing jumps and wheelies, and inside the store the dog hears the motorcycles approaching and takes off out the door. The dog races past the campers to chase the bikes. Billy runs after the dog and one of the campers tries to stop him, but she falls down, which allows Billy to get further away where he can't hear her yelling after him over the sound of the bikes. Steve comes flying over the hill and just misses hitting Billy. Joel is next to come flying over the hill and he doesn't see Billy until it's too late to do anything. He hits Billy square in the chest, sending him flying. Joel freaks out and loads his motorcycle back on the trailer, and when confronted about leaving, he says that he's been drinking, so it won't matter that it was an accident. He takes off in his car while Chris goes to call an ambulance, but there's no phone in the store. Steve stays with the injured Billy while the others take their truck to find the nearest phone to call for help. Ed returns and sees Steve kneeling in the field and starts running when he sees Billy lying on the ground. He scoops Billy up and takes off in his truck, leaving Steve just standing there. Maggie, Tracy, and Chris make it to the cabin they were going to when they spot Joel and his girlfriend Kim there. The cabin has a phone, but Joel had already cut the phone line. He takes their car keys and then locks them up in the closet so they can't go back and get help. He's a real piece of work. But it turns out he's on probation for another accident, and he'll go to jail if they find out about this one. Back at home, Ed lays Billy's lifeless body on the bed and cleans the dirt off him. And it finally hits him that Billy is dead, and his grief starts to turn to anger. Ed takes Billy's body out to the little shanty town where Mr. Wallace and a bunch of other families live. Ed refuses the money Mr. Wallace tries to pay him for his feed, and instead wants information on how to locate an old woman who lives out in the hills. Mr. Wallace knows who he's talking about, but pretends he doesn't know. Ed reaches into the truck and uncovers Billy's face and tells him that city folks killed his boy by running over him. Mr. Wallace tells Ed that the old woman can't help Billy. All she can do is take Ed straight to hell. Ed leaves without the information he was looking for. And on his way back down the hill, he stopped by Mr. Wallace's oldest grandson, Bud, who overheard them talking. In exchange for $10, he tells Ed that the old woman he's looking for is known as Haggis. And then Ed makes him jump in the back of the truck to show him exactly where to find her. Halfway up the hill, Bud jumps out because he's too scared to keep going. He tells Ed to keep following the road until he can't anymore. When he sees a cabin, then he knows he's found Haggis. We then see Ed carrying Billy through a marsh on his way up to an old cabin. Ed enters without knocking, and the old lady is just sitting in the middle of the room with her back to him. When we get a good look at her, she's very old, very wrinkly, and very creepy looking. She tells Ed that raising the dead isn't something that she has the power to do. He lays Billy's body on the bed and opens a bag of coins and jewelry as an offering to her. She makes him say out loud what he wants. What Ed wants is revenge on the people that killed his boy. He's pretty much making a deal with the devil, and we all know how that usually goes. She tells him to take a shovel and go deep into the woods where he'll find something buried. He needs to dig it up and bring it back to her. He doesn't know what he's looking for, but she tells him that he'll know when he sees it. Shovel in hand, Ed starts off into the woods. You would think that he would have taken a flashlight with him. It's dark out, and the deeper into the woods he goes, the foggier it gets. He eventually comes upon a tall tree stump with pumpkins sitting on top. He climbs up and starts digging into the stump, and after a couple of feet he finds a small corpse. He freaks out and drops it, but confronting his fears, he climbs back up to complete his task. Ed returns to Haggis carrying the corpse from the tree. She cuts Ed's hand and drips his blood into a bowl, and then she does the same to Billy. Ed's starting to look a little woozy as Haggis pours the blood onto the corpse. He collapses, and then the corpse starts coming to life, and it starts off as a child version of Pumpkinhead, but quickly grows to full size. Just before he passes out, Ed is able to get a glimpse. When he comes to, Haggis tells him he can go now because it has begun. He drives back down the hill with Billy, but is still super woozy. He pulls over and hallucinates that Billy rose up and asked him what he's done. Once at the cemetery, Ed stands in front of the marker for his dead wife as he starts digging a hole for Billy. Maggie leaves the cabin in a trance and Steve goes after her. He catches up to her and gets her to snap out of it just before Pumpkinhead shows up and snatches him up into the air. As Maggie screams, Ed can see what Pumpkinhead sees. He drops Steve's bloody body back to the ground, and Maggie goes to help him, but he's quickly dragged away. Joel finally starts coming to his senses and lets Chris and Tracy out of the closet. As soon as they're out, Maggie comes running back in, screaming her head off. Chris and Joel grab their rifles and head out in search of Steve while the girls stay behind in the cabin. Back in the cabin, Maggie is trying to tell the others that the devil killed Steve. And of course they don't believe her because she's pretty much been hysterical since the accident. She says the guns won't help the boys. Only God can stop what's out there. Tracy rummages through the kitchen drawers and pulls out a couple of big knives. You know, in case God doesn't show up. Chris and Joel run back into the cabin empty-handed. They tell the girls that they weren't able to find Steve. Maggie's pissed and says she's not leaving until they do find Steve. She goes running out the front door, and what's the first thing she does? She finds Steve. Actually, Steve found her. Pumpkinhead hung his body from the front porch. He drops Steve and then grabs Maggie by the head while the others just watch. The two guys with guns do absolutely nothing. They're totally worthless. They just stand there. Tracy's the only one that takes off after Maggie until Chris catches up to her. Ed is sitting at his table loading his shotgun when he starts experiencing Pumpkinhead vision again. He gets in his car while still tripping. Not really a good time to get behind the wheel, Ed. Turns out Ed was heading back to see Haggis. He comes crawling in asking her to explain what's happening to him, and she says what he's feeling will pass, they just have to let it finish. Ed wants her to stop Pumpkinhead, but she refuses. He says, fine, I'll do it myself. She says, go ahead and try. You'll fail and you'll die. I told you that doing a deal with the devil never works out. There's always a loophole that bites you in the ass. Pumpkinhead starts toying with Joel and Kim by holding Maggie up to the window. She's still alive, but not for long. He kills Maggie by smashing her head through the window, and Kim instantly faints. Joel mans up by grabbing a big-ass knife and heads out to confront the demon. Not finding Pumpkinhead, Joel goes back into the cabin, and we get our best look at him so far. He's standing over Kim and starts to reach down for her, but Joel makes his move to stop him. Pumpkinhead grabs him and chucks him across the room and then drags Kim away. Tracy and Chris show up just as Joel runs outside screaming about something taking Kim. We then see Kim getting lifted by her head up into the trees. And they run around the back of the cabin where they see Pumpkinhead way up in a tree holding Kim by her melon. I mean, they're way up there. Joel screams, but it's too late. Pumpkinhead lets go and Kim falls to the ground with a large thud on a big rock. So yeah, she's dead. Ed shows up at their cabin with his shotgun and sees Steve and Maggie's bodies, while Chris, Tracy, and Joel are off gallivanting through the woods. They end up in the shanty town where everyone ignores their pleas for help. Pumpkinhead shows up and approaches them. Out of nowhere, a shot rings out. Ed is shooting at Pumpkinhead and shoots him square in the chest, dropping him to the ground. Joel's dumbass walks over to Pumpkinhead and shoots it in the head to make sure he's dead. Yeah, he's not dead. Pumpkinhead grabs Joel by the leg and knocks him down. He then takes Joel's rifle and stabs him in the chest with it. Chris and Tracy watch in horror as Pumpkinhead raises Joel into the air like a human shish kebab. Chris and Tracy take off running as Ed is feeling really woozy and Pumpkinhead is playing around with Joel's body. A dog is growling at Ed and then jumps on him, biting his arm. As Ed tries to fight off the dog, we see Pumpkinhead raise his own arm up in pain. It looks like the connection between Ed and Pumpkinhead is a two-way street. Mr. Wallace is hiding inside with his family. His grandson Bud keeps looking out the window scared that it might come after them. This is where we hear the official Pumpkinhead rules. It only kills what it was called upon to kill, or whatever gets in its way. Bud decides he's going to sneak out to see if Pumpkinhead is real or just a story used to scare little kids. He finds Tracy and Chris and leads them to safety, which comes in the form of an old burned out church. He figures it was a holy place, so it should be a place that the devil can't enter. Once inside the church, Bud explains the legend of Pumpkinhead to Tracy and Chris, and about the time he finishes up, Pumpkinhead makes his grand entrance. They take off running as he makes his way slowly through the church. Now this is actually a pretty cool scene, and Pumpkinhead looks really badass as he moves towards a makeshift cross hanging on the wall. He pulls the cross down and smashes it to bits. Bud leads Chris and Tracy back to their cabin, only to find all of their cars have been smashed up. Only one motorcycle remains untouched, so Chris jumps on it and gets it started. What he doesn't know is that Pumpkinhead used to work as a mechanic. He turns around and finds Pumpkinhead standing there holding the bike's chain. Pumpkinhead picks up the motorcycle with Chris still on it and chucks him off to the side where he's trapped under the bike. Bud and Tracy take off running and run right into Ed, who tells them to follow him. They make it to his truck while Chris is literally getting stomped on by Pumpkinhead. Ed takes them back to his house and goes out to his barn to rig up some propane tanks to make a makeshift flamethrower. Tracy tries to explain to him that it was an accident what happened to Billy. Ed starts tripping again as we see Pumpkinhead throw Chris to the ground as he knocks down the front door of the house where Bud is left alone. Chris is still alive and starts crawling away as Pumpkinhead goes through the house looking for Bud, who's hiding in the closet. Worst hide-and-seek player ever. The closet is always the first place they check. Out in the barn, Tracy freaks out when Ed's eyes turn all weird and evil. It's all coming together finally. Tracy finds Chris out in the front yard as Pumpkinhead walks out holding Bud by the neck. The last one to join the party is Ed, who is bringing his new toy with him. Unfortunately, Ed's flamethrower strap gets snagged on a nail, spinning him around where he manages to spear himself on a pitchfork. Yanking his arm back in pain causes him to let go of Bud, and Ed and Pumpkinhead make evil eye contact as they both realize they're connected to each other. They've become Pumpkin Ed. Tracy watches as Ed frees himself from the pitchfork, and she figures it out too. Ed heads to his truck while Tracy picks up the flamethrower. She blasts Pumpkinhead right in the face with it and nothing happens. He's just standing there smoking. He comes closer, so she hits him again. Still nothing. He knocks it out of her hand and snatches her up by her neck, which seems to be his signature move. Ed reaches into his truck and pulls a gun out of the glove box. Pumpkinhead is about to kill Tracy when you hear a gunshot go off, causing him to drop her. Ed comes stumbling out, having shot himself in the head. He falls to the ground, and so does Pumpkinhead. Bud walks past Pumpkinhead just as Ed comes to. This causes Pumpkinhead to also wake up, and he grabs Bud by the leg, knocking him down. Ed reaches for his gun as Pumpkinhead rises up, holding Bud upside down. But Tracy grabs the gun, and at his request, shoots Ed several times. This kills both Ed and Pumpkinhead, and they end up laying on the ground in the exact same pose. So yeah, they're dead. So Tracy and Bud survive somewhat unscathed, and poor Chris is alive, but I'm betting he's paralyzed from the waist down. Everything is quiet until suddenly Pumpkinhead goes up in flames. In the epilogue, we see Haggis out at the old tree stump bearing a small Pumpkinhead body. As she's tossing dirt into the grave, we get a closer look at the body and see that it's actually Ed's body that she's burying. It looks like Pumpkinhead, but it's wearing the necklace that Billy made. The end. On its surface, Pumpkinhead seemed like a goofy idea to me, but once I saw it in the theater, I ended up liking it a lot. I think they did an amazing job with the look of this demonic revenge creature. And having Lance Henriksen as the lead was also a big plus for the movie. He always brings some serious weight to the roles he plays. There were some direct-to-video sequels that came out, but none of them were very good. And normally, I'm not a big fan of reboots, but this is one that I'd be curious to see rebooted. How many of you saw Pumpkinhead in the theater back in the day? Let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below to help grow this channel. I appreciate you taking time out of your day and hope you will come back for the next Back to the Feature.